So, welcome. This is my first discussion of the 10, and I've chosen this one to be the first because I believe at the moment, my own perspective, that it's the most important. But they're all equally important because they're all related intrinsically as part of a whole. That's what I found getting to the end of the investigation, so I shouldn't really say that at the start, but I hope to prove that and give you the reasoning behind why I found that. Nevertheless, this is a very divisive one as well, and I think it's a really interesting one, and there's a lot of different angles of looking at it. So this is all about the commandment of worship only God, or worship only the Lord your God, however it's worded. And basically, I think we tend to make a big assumption, and I know I did, and I still do, about what I would consider worship. It's something that I suppose if I was to ask someone in the street what they think worshipping someone is, I suppose you'd think of it as giving thanks to someone, singing songs to someone, perhaps songs of praise, speaking eloquently about someone, bowing to someone, acknowledging someone. I suppose there's a lot more to it than that, but I suppose that's the general idea that I would get if I was to think about worshipping someone. And I kind of think that that's kind of how most people would view it. I think there's a lot of, I might be wrong, there's a lot of variations. I'm going to consult the Thesaurus to see what they define worship as, and we're just going to come up with a list of synonyms. So they've got worship as to venerate, to revere, to honor, to esteem, to adore, to idolize, to deify, to adulterate, to praise, to exalt, to glorify. And the nouns coming up with that are veneration, reverence, homage, adoration, honor, esteem, adulation, praise, glorification, exaltation. So it's words to that effect. They're the various synonyms that it relates to, and it's to hold something as sacred. That's what I would define it as. I'm surprised they didn't say that, but it's to hold something as the most important thing. You could say it's something at the center of your life. It's that level of importance, to adulate something, to esteem it so much. You are putting your life in the hands of it. You consider it that level of importance, So I think we need to be extremely cautious what we are giving that sort of level of veneration to. If it is something that is genuinely benevolent, is helpful to us, then I'm sure it's a good thing. If it's something that's hinderous to us, then it's something that actually could be quite a bad thing. My own story, I suppose, I spent many years, I suppose I was agnostic, but I was a sort of atheist agnostic, really. And I never really looked so much into the subject. I didn't spend hours and months studying it, certainly not at an academic level. I probably spent minutes looking at it. It came up in the occasional debate. I met other people that were religious. I often didn't like some of the ideas that they used, and I found it a bit, I would have described it as either wishful thinking or childish or immature, and I found that it seemed irrational and illogical to me. Why would you put so much effort and energy around something? This is how I looked at it. There was no evidence for, that I didn't find any kind of reasoning for. And so, yeah, it just seemed like a waste of energy and people just looking for something to find answers that would prove themselves right. But I think really I hadn't looked into it that much at the time. I later became much more agnostic, I suppose, and less atheist, and more sort of open-minded and sort of, I don't know what the answer is, I don't know if there's a God, and if there's a God, what God is, So I was asking a lot more questions. And of course, you can't really say there is a God or there isn't a God unless you first define what you mean by that. It's hard to deny the existence of something that you haven't actually clearly defined. It's hard to prove the existence of it equally too. So I think it naturally became important to define the terms and to question first, what do I mean by God? And what do I mean by existence too? becoming a child again and asking what seems like very simple questions is really seemed to be really important. Like to question: had I taken things for granted? Had I made assumptions? Were the beliefs that I had rested and founded upon good reasoning, or was it actually something that I had just assumed? Was it something as a result of my upbringing or the society I was around? Why did I believe those things? That was the most important thing to question. I've been on a journey over years. My beliefs have changed. They're still changing. So even when I was an agnostic, and I'm still an agnostic theist now. So although I believe in God now, I don't believe I know everything about God. I believe there's still a lot more to learn. I suppose my way of looking at it is that we're students of God and we're always learning more. And however much we progress, there's still ever more to learn. So that's how I look at it now. And worshipping God, I suppose, is a really important part of that. But what does that mean? And to me, I suppose it means several things. I would say the hardest thing, but the most important thing, I suppose, is confessing to God. And that involves being honest to God and talking openly about the wrong things you do. If you swear or you're quick to anger, you tend to resort to drinking heavily when you're feeling down as a solution to problems. You're quick to answer people back and judge them, and you are spending a lot of time moaning and complaining rather than looking for solutions or constructive remedies. And to be honest, that actually probably describes a lot of my bad characteristics, and if I'm honest, and there's probably a lot more as well. And I don't really feel that I need to confess those to God, because I feel that's not of God's benefit. God knows those things. That's what I believe. And the reason I believe that is that I've found, looking into it, the nature for God to me is that God knows things. God is knowing, all knowing in that sense. So it's really for my benefit that I acknowledge those wrong things as faults within myself. And if I don't acknowledge them as faults, I don't know they're faults. If I don't know that, then I don't look for solutions or answers to them. So I suppose that's the important reasoning. And I suppose you could say lots of psychologists believe that anyway. Some who have a belief in God and many who don't. So, there's sound reasoning to acknowledging, confessing your sins to yourself, in fact. Never mind to God. But I would say, for me, and I can't offer any evidence, but I can only say it's personal experience that being honest to God and about your faults and asking for forgiveness and asking for help and courage to overcome those faults and to try and transform and become better. I would say that's a really important part, because it acknowledges that part of all God being all knowing, but also all forgiving as well. The grace of God is referred to. So I think asking for forgiveness requires you to first be honest about where you've wronged and what you've done wrong. You can't ask for forgiveness for something if you don't first acknowledge there's a wrong in that. And I think there's a psychological reality to that, but I that most people would acknowledge whether they believe in God or not. But I find that in my investigations, there's a theological dimension to that as well, and that not undermining that psychological meaning of it, but in actual fact adding an extra layer on top of that actually supports it. So I find, like, for me, worshipping God, I think it's actually about being honest and having a conversation. You're not just talking about your faults to God and here's what I've done wrong, but it is a lot more to that. You're thanking God, you're being thankful and acknowledging as well all the good things that you've been given in your life, the support and the help from different people, your material needs that have been met, whether that's shelter or food or clothing or medication, or whether that's computer or television, or whether that's a program that you enjoyed or you felt actually gave you something interesting and something informative and something that added use to your life. It's thanking God, for moderate weather or for all good things, that have helped and enabled you to progress in your life. And so it's acknowledging those good things and having gratitude. And there's lots of people who have gratitude and without necessarily a belief in God, they may thank other people, and I think it's important to do that too. I think we should acknowledge other people's support where it is good, And, we should thank God as we understand God if we have that belief. I'm not here to convince anyone of that, because my own belief is that you only find the answers to those things through a personal search. So I don't think it's possible to actually give you the evidence for that. And I think that's something you either find yourself from searching, or you don't. And I certainly don't judge other people for not finding those answers and not agreeing with me. I spent many years being a firm atheist and thinking it was irrational to believe in God. And I don't think I was totally immoral. I certainly wasn't. And I certainly did good and I did bad during those years, really. And I suppose I don't feel that I looked into it enough. I didn't spend months and I didn't invest enough time looking into it. I probably looked into the subjects very loosely, skirting over them, and not sort of looking at it as in depth as perhaps I could have done. So in terms of worshipping God, I think it's important to question what we consider worship as. I think it's a great thing to go out and sing a song and give a poem or a speech or talk or anything you feel moved to. It could even be a dance, couldn't it? A lot of people combine dance and music and song and poetry and various things, or giving a talk, or whatever you feel that you're moved to. I think and also it's publicly acknowledging that as well. So you're not ashamed of your belief in God, and I think that's something that's really important to be able to do that. But at the same time, there are concerns that I've got, and having gone to a variety of different denominational churches and temples and over many years, I think my problem with that is that different people have different beliefs in God. And I sometimes have hymns and songs and different ways that I hear different ways of people praying and talking to God I don't always agree with. There's oftentimes someone will pray over me or sing a song with me, and we will agree and be on the same page, and 100% we have got the same beliefs about something, and and we can sing together and give our all into it. And then sometimes someone will say a prayer and it irks me a little bit, and they'll say something that we've got, and it reveals we've got different beliefs about God somehow. And I feel like I can't say the amen afterwards. And I'll give you an example of that. There was a debate I had at a house once. Me and this guy, and we were having an argument, actually. It spilled over where our tempers got a little frayed. We're putting each other's down a little bit. And over the Israel-Palestine conflict, in fact. And we both took up our different positions and that. And we both had very good points, I felt, actually, but we were both quite defensive and a little antagonistic towards each other. So anyway, we sort of like skirmished, and we were a bit insulting, and it got a bit degrading as the argument progressed. And afterwards, he sort of came up to me and then sort of said, "I want to say a prayer for you." And I thought, good, this is our chance to sort of make up now. And but actually, the words of the prayer were, "Dear God, please let Nick see the light, and let him see the truth that has been covered up from him, and let him come to the truth from his place of ignorance where he's skulking." It was words to that effect, really. And I felt like that prayer was loaded, and I was actually not coming from a place of, let's try and make amends and let's try and meet each other in a peaceful way of trying to understand each other. I felt like it was actually loaded with you're wrong and I'm right, and I felt like that actual prayer wasn't really coming from a I care about you view. It was just continuing that argument, but in a clever manner, disguised as a prayer. So I kind of felt like I couldn't say amen after that. I felt even more angry at him after that prayer, actually. So I didn't feel that was worshipping God at that time. And I've probably been guilty of such things too. I've made an act of saying something, trying to use it to forward an argument of mine or something, or to something that to take advantage over someone. And actually that seems really wrong and kind of like against what the whole idea of praying for someone should be, where it's to try and help them and to sort of like to try and connect with them on a deeper level than the petty feuds that separate us, rather than using the prayer as a means to sort of like carry on some sort of feud or to justify some sort of argument. That seemed to me quite a wrong thing to do. But I know, I'm not judging him. I know I've done that too. But so I think we need to be cautious when we're saying a prayer for other people, that we're not doing it to gain some sort of advantage over someone or to use it to score points or something. I think that there is a tendency that we all can have to do that, and I think that's not actually a sacred thing, therefore, and that's actually just a human thing that we all do, isn't it? And that's, I tend to think prayer is something that it's something that's between you and God. It's a sort of conversation, but there is sometimes a time and place where you might feel moved, or it's appropriate, to pray out loud to someone if they ask you to, or if you feel moved to do that. That may be something that you feel that's right for you or not. It's not for me to decide, but I think it's got to be, what is your intention, and what's the motivation behind it, I think. And I think sometimes I felt like it can be as well that we're in danger sometimes when we do it in public of making a show of it and it becoming a performance. I always remember I was at this one service where we were all singing and we were enjoying it. And when you let yourself go in the spirit and you're singing a song, you truly believe in your heart, and you don't care about hitting the notes. You just sort of like, it's reverent and it's full of all that passion. And then there was this guy afterwards that stopped us during the actual discussions, and he said, well, I'm a musician, I've trained and studied it, and he took us all apart and said, like, you didn't hit the right notes, you were singing off key, and you weren't in rhythm. And it was like, he felt like it was an X Factor performance, and we were all sort of being judged for our various, and I we all sort of complained to him and said, it's not a performance, we're not there to showcase, how good we are at singing or hitting the right notes, or, we were there purely because we enjoyed it. It was an expression of our faith, and it wasn't there to sort of like YouTube it, or to sort of, it wasn't there for an audience or for someone to sort of rate us out of 10. It was there just because we enjoyed it, and we felt afterwards, like all charged and topped up. It was a good feeling, and I feel like, yeah, you can do it on your own. You can do it in a field, in a factory, in a farm. You can do it while you're driving, as long as it doesn't distract you from, keeping safe on the road. You can do it whenever you feel moved to. And I think there's a danger when you're in public of doing it for a show and to prove, how holier than thou, and making. But I think there's also equally a danger of when you're not doing it public, of being ashamed of your faith and trying to cover it up and hide it away like it's some awful secret. So, it's always about balance, isn't it? And not going too far to make a show and performance out of it, but at the same time, not hiding it away as if it's some awful, embarrassing, dirty secret or something. And, I suppose it's saying and singing and performing, and not performing, but it's expressing yourself in a way that you feel is right and honours your belief and your values. And sometimes that, of course, that changes over time. Of course it does, and what you feel was right, before, last week or last year, you might look back and think, actually, I could have changed, I could have said things, or, there were mistakes, I think that's part of the learning process, isn't it? We look back at, lectures we've given or songs we've sung, and we edit and we say, oh, I could change the lyrics on that, or, or perhaps, I went a bit far on this, or I didn't go far enough, and we're all human. We do some right and some wrong things, even when we're worshipping, whether we do it in public or in private, that's true anyway. And there's always things we can improve in that. But I think it's just, that thing for me is looking at it, it's not something to hide, it's not some terrible secret, but at the same time, it's not something that we're there to perform. We're not there to sell an idea or whatever. God doesn't need salespeople. God's not some sort of person that's weak and needs thousands and millions of people out there selling some sort of message. I don't believe that anyway. And I believe, if God's powerful enough to create the heavens and earth, God's powerful enough to speak to any one individual in that, So we're not there as, sales agents to force people or to coerce them into believing anything. That's up to them to find their own truth and to do their own searching. And that's, I would say, the other concern I have, aside from making prayer or worship too private or too public, I I'm aware, as a global issue, some people may feel that they're forced or coerced into praying. And this tends to happen in theological societies, whether that's a nation or an empire or a province that's under a theological rule, or whether that's a family, and your child and your parents have a belief, or the school you go to has a belief, or the club or the society, and they're getting you to say a prayer. I've gone through that. You say the words, you read off the script, you've got to do it because that's the pressure, and it's like being an actor, really. You don't necessarily believe it, you just do it, and that's it. And I think it, like, when it's forced or you're coerced into it, it doesn't have that same meaning at all, not at all. And you just do it like an actor, really, because you feel pressured, or like you've got to do it, and there's something's going to happen to you if you don't. You'll get in trouble with whatever the theological authorities are. And actual fact, that sort of undermines the whole belief in God, really. Like, I mean, like, the whole personal journey of like investigating whether it's true or not is undermined by that. Like, if God is real, and that, like, if there really is a God that forces people to worship him, that would be a tyrannical, monstrous God who I wouldn't want to worship anyway, to be honest. I personally feel that that's us and our worst attributes of humanity, demonizing God and forcing a version of God that actually is just us at our worst, really, like wanting each other to be worshipped, really. And I feel that that's not actually, like, God wants us to voluntarily have a relationship with God. And I think that once you add coercion or manipulation into that, then it's not a genuine, it's not real, and it totally backfires. It undermines that it's not a real relationship anyway. So I'm totally against the idea of anyone being coerced or forced on any way into sort of saying a prayer or dance or giving a speech. Or I acknowledge that there's people that do feel pressured and have to do that sometimes. I've done that myself in the past, and I've just, I remember being at a service once. I must have been 12 or 13. Somebody said, "Give this speech. It means that you're a member of this church." And I didn't even understand the words I was saying. I just read it off because it was to make other people feel happy, because I knew if I didn't, there'll be an argument, someone will be upset. And just for an easy life at the time, it was just easier to go along with that. But did I believe it in my heart? No, I didn't even understand what the words meant. So that's, that was a time when I suppose I was at such a young age then, when I would just do that. I wouldn't now as an adult. But I suppose the people telling me to do that, also the people providing me with my material needs and helping me in that sense. So I kind of felt like there was a kind of coercion in it too, like it wasn't really a free choice anyway. So I kind of, I can see that some people feel trapped, whether it's through childhood or being under a theological rule, and I feel like it shouldn't be like that. But when you're in a different position, you're not under such pressures, you're more able to make a free will choice yourself. And voluntarily worshipping God is completely different, because it's believing in something in your heart. It's sort of like singing a song that you totally have written yourself, and you've written the lyrics, so you believe the lyrics, and reading or singing a song that someone else has written for you. And you might believe in some of the lyrics, but some of them you're just not sure what they mean or if you agree, and some of them you might even hate. And it's just like, but you sing along anyway because that's the anthem that you're given, and you feel like, if I don't do that, there'll be consequences. And it's like that kind of that's a show of belief again, and just for the sake of making someone happy or not getting into trouble, and they're all the wrong reasons for doing it, of course. And what are the right reasons? Because it makes you feel good inside. It makes you feel warm. It makes you feel energized afterwards. And it makes you feel in your heart that it's the right thing to do. I would say that's, and you can only really experience that after you've done it. You only know it. I suppose the proof is in the pudding, and you know it when you've done it. I can't really. The other thing about, only worshipping God is you have to sort of question, of course, what is God? And it's something we're always learning. I don't think God is something that you can put in a dictionary and define in a few words. If anyone knew what God was, it wouldn't be transcendental thing that it is, it would totally undermine the whole notion. So I think that whilst I'm a theist, I'm also an agnostic theist, and I don't believe that you can totally know the whole nature of God. That's personally, I think that means we're ever learning, and we're always there for students. I mean, it doesn't mean that we're always like at the same level. You might progress in your knowledge. It's like getting to an ever higher number, but you can never reach infinity. I mean, that's how I sort of relate to it, really. But I kind of feel as well that it's important to this whole thing of only worshipping God really relates to the second commandment that I'll come into shortly, and this is a real interesting link into that. And the second commandment that I'm going to go into is idol worship. And actually, as an atheist, and I would imagine an atheist audience, they probably wouldn't even get this far, I would imagine. Because, and I probably in the old days, I'd be like 30 seconds into it, and someone's already saying stuff that's unquestioned and like assumptions about God and the Bible bashing, or they're just trying to push their theological agenda. And I do have an agenda, I suppose everyone does, and that is kind of like to push beliefs that I feel will be beneficial because they've been beneficial to me. Whether that's right or wrong, and that's, everyone's got an agenda, whether it's a good agenda or a bad agenda, isn't it? That's what. And I think I probably would have alienated most atheist audiences within the first minute or two easily. And I think in the old days, I probably would have switched off very early and thought, yeah, this is someone who's got, their own theological agenda, and they're probably brain warped, and they probably got their own ideas, and there's no point watching it because they're just trying to sort of like repeat all the same things I've heard before, and I don't need to hear that. But I've been lectured enough, and I think there's probably a degree of cynicism in that, but there's also a degree of truth in that. Like, I don't want to hear the same theological arguments repeated ad nausea either. But I think actually, interestingly for me, as an atheist back then, like it did relate to me, that commandment. And I'll tell you the level that it did on a psychological level. And basically, like, if you are not worshipping God, right, what are you worshipping? Well, maybe you say you're worshipping nothing, but that's an assumption too, isn't it? Like, and I've looked, if I try to look at it honestly, I do worship and I revere things too much. I'm in danger of doing it now, like all the time. And quite often in my life, like where I give too much credence to something, too much importance to something, I idolize it, I worship it, I give too much reverence and respect to it. And I have had tendency to do that. If I'm honest, I do that with drugs sometimes, with cannabis I've done that, with alcohol. I do that with other people sometimes. So I tend to look at people sometimes and I put them on a pedestal. Sometimes it's been a teacher at university, a friend, somebody that I'm close to at work. It's been a variety of different people, and it's always backfired. It's always led to me finding out they're flawed just like everyone else. They've got their good and bad. And I think that there's a tendency with me, and I think if I'm honest, with everyone actually, to put too much respect on different things. And I think that we all can worship different things. And actually that is relevant to everyone, whether you're an atheist, whether you're a pagan, Muslim, Jew, or whatever nominational Christian or Buddhist, or whatever the kind of belief system that you have. I think it's something that's relevant to everyone to ask themselves honestly, am I giving too much respect to anything or anyone in my life? And that's the next thing on the idol worship. I'm going to come on to talk to a lot deeper onto that. So, giving worship to God actually does relate to that. Do I give worship? Do I give too much respect to anything in my life? And I would say yes. The answer is we all have a tendency to do that sometimes. For some people it's money. Money is the root of many evil, but it's not for everyone. If I had a lot of money, I would be the same, and I'd have a temptation to spend it all on the wrong things, or to hoard it away and to not use it to try and help other people and myself in the process. You know, for some people it's power, you know, and power can corrupt, but power can be used for good and bad. You know, for some people it's drugs or alcohol, or it can be any number of things in your life, or a combination of lots of different things. You know, it could be shopping or spending money, you know, what we call retail therapy. It can be other people that we hold in too high self-esteem. So we can treat lots of different things like God, you know, and we can worship them or give too much thanks or too much praise to people and venerate them too much, you know. And when you look into it, you know, everyone's got their good and their bad about them. I'm not saying it's an equal amount, but no one's perfect. Nobody is God. You know, that's true enough to me. And you know, if I'm honest, you need to look at what is God, of course, because I don't think God is a person. You know, I don't think God is a thing, because I don't want to sound bad. People can be very good and supportive and wonderful and constantly surprise you of how good they can be. But equally, people can be very bad. They can let you down. We're all capable of doing monstrous things and doing harmful and terrible things sometimes. People can really shock you at the level of depravity that they're capable of. But equally, people can be really wonderful and tremendously supportive as well. But nobody is all good. You know, there's that old saying, no man is good, but I would say no man is all good, you know, because it means you can't be good all of the time. Yes, you do some good, but no, you're not always good. And no one is. And so I would say no man is God. If you think God is all just, all good, all merciful, all knowing, all powerful, if those are the attributes you've come to consider God as, right? Even if we accept, as an atheist might say, right, those are the attributes of perfection that doesn't exist, you could still arrive at the same conclusion that nobody lives up to those great ideals. Whether you are atheist, agnostic, or have a theist belief, you know, you still would have to acknowledge nobody is perfect, you know, and there's nothing in this world that you should put all of your faith in, because anything, any institution can let you down, whether it's a church, a mosque, a synagogue or temple, you know, whether it's a police officer, a teacher, a parent, a friend, a child, a brother, a sister. You know, we've all got good and bad within us. We're all capable of that. So we shouldn't look up to anyone or anything as being God. You know, there are real dangers in that, in actual fact. And so I would say that is a much bigger issue that I'm going to explore much more in the video that's specifically about idol worship. So I think for me, I've explored the issue of worshipping God. For me, it's a continuing relationship, and that relationship is voluntary. It's not based on any coercion. It's not based on anyone forcing you or